Welcome to the Rachel Varga podcast. I'm thrilled to have you join us here today. We have a really interesting topic to cover in today's episode. We are going to talk about the concept of self-care and how we can shift this to more self and community care. And this is actually really interesting because my mom actually brought this up to me today. She's like, oh, I was listening to a sermon the other day, and this is actually from my dad's cousin who married my husband and I, which is pretty cool. And he's talking about how right now it's all about self-love, self-care, self-discovery, self, this. And it's like, well, what about caring for our neighbors and our communities and all of that good stuff? Like, how do we achieve some balance with that and not just have it all be about self? Because we're all on screens here, we're presenting ourselves in various different ways, and we've had some time in lockdown and a little bit more time to ourselves, but now we're kind of opening things up and expanding a little bit more. But it's a really interesting era we are in. So we have the fabulous Leslie Miranda joining us again today. Leslie's been on the show before, and Leslie is definitely someone who I come to when I want to share messages from a counselor's perspective. So welcome, Leslie. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you. It's so nice to be here. And I always love to connect with you on various topics.
And I want to encourage each and every one of you listening, if you have a question about the topic of self-love and this whole era we are in and kind of how we can achieve a little bit of balance, because ideally, we want to also balance our body, mind, spirit, and energy and bring forth a higher level of homeostasis, if you will, which I see this radiating in my most beautiful, radiant clients. So that's kind of why I'm talking about this, because this does lend to the way that we interact with ourselves and people, places, and things. So Leslie, your experience or just your observation as a counselor, how did the era of self-care and self-love come about?
That's a great question. And, I think initially, probably we all really needed to hear that message. When I really think maybe it was catered to the working woman who had 5 kids and a full-time job and was doing a whole bunch of stuff, who would maybe factor herself out of the equation consistently and end up really burnt out. So someone like that, obviously, they really need to hear that it's okay to take care of themselves and love themselves, and that that's actually really important so that they can take care of everybody else. So I think it started with really good intentions, and it's still a very good thing, of course, to take care of oneself. But I know we're going to talk today about another aspect where how can we take that love and also share it with our community.
I don't think that this concept was around when our grandmothers were around, and I almost wonder if it started to stem from commercialism and commercials. Use this product to promote your self-care practices. And, of course, I've been guilty of that too. It's I want to do nice things for my body with this product or that type of self-care practice. So what's your kind of perspective on that? Do you think that it has come about from, marketing even? It's like diamonds are a girl's best friend almost kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because when you think of a diamond, it's really meant to be something sentimental and powerful and something very symbolic, and then it gets commercial. So I almost think it's probably similar in that self-love, great thing. Take care of yourself, nurture yourself. But then, as you said, somebody else gets a hold of it and starts marketing it, and it kind of gets disproportionate and out of control from the original message that was intended.
Yeah, I think that's great because, back in the day, thousands of years ago, we were kind of taught, and it was sort of encouraged to look after our temple, look after our body. And I have to say, my husband is such a prime example of this. And you as a marriage coach, I'm sure you're just loving hearing me say that about my partner, but it's true, right? He's got to look after himself. He's got to get in tune with himself. So this is, I think, a really good practice, but we have to balance it with looking after ourselves and others. So yeah, I think that diamond, is a girl's best friend analogy. Maybe it kind of segued in there. Well, yeah.
Yeah, again, that it gets commercial, because the idea of self-care so that we can have energy to energize our lives and to energize our connection with others, such a good idea. But just self-love and only self-care, at the expense of our community, that's something to look at. When you mentioned this topic, I was thinking of an old Hebrew aphorism I've heard that goes, if I'm not for.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that my name is actually the Hebrew spelling as well. So I just want to jump into the next question here. How do we balance caring for ourselves while also caring for others? What do you see in your relation, in your counseling with your clients, with balancing that self-love versus caring for your partner and your family?
Well, I do think we have to make sure that our tank is filled up. And so we have to start with ourselves and taking care of ourselves and getting sleep and making sure that we are able to show up and be our best for other people and for our responsibilities and obligations. So that's the part where self-care and self-love is a good thing and comes in handy, right? But then, we want to look at what are we have stewardship over in our lives. I like to think like a metaphor of, there's a lot of plants around us, and that plant may be like a person, it could be our job, it could be our roles as a mother or as a daughter. We want to take time to water those plants as well. So I think it's about checking in with oneself. How are we doing? How am I feeling? Again, that's the good part about the self-love and self-care, but also looking around and noticing, is there an opportunity to connect with people? Or I like to think, is there an opportunity to energize certain connections with other people? And if so, what can we do to energize them?
Oh, I thought that was really sweet. Energize your connections with other people. It's almost like placing an intention and an emphasis on, really being present and connecting with that person. And sometimes even just an act of self-care, for another person, to care for another person. Sorry, I caught myself there. It's almost like subconsciously programmed in myself to say self-care, self-love instead of loving others. It's weird. Like, what came up for you when I had that stumble there?
Well, again, I think that we've had to learn perhaps how to love ourselves. So it's understandable that that's part of the verbiage, and that is a good thing. And you're right, there's just so much emphasis on it. And, so I could see how that would just be now our default. And, it's basically, we just don't want to forgo either. If we have connections with people, we want to energize them. And it's about a balance, like a seesaw. So let's just say that it's been a really hard week and we were supporting someone else and caring for them, and they had something major going on. Okay, so then maybe we take a little time and energize ourselves and just reset, and at the same time, if we're like, gosh, we've gone on our vacation, we've done our spa, we've done whatever the self-care, it's like, okay, what about some of the people around us that have something going on? Maybe there's an opportunity to connect with them and see how we can share support and add value to their life.
I love it. So I'm going to straight up ask the counselor on the call here, how do you do this in your relationship?
Well, I do take that time to, first of all, just survey. There's that old-fashioned way that people would check the weather. They like lick their finger and feel around and see which way the wind's blowing. So it's also about like just looking around, taking that moment to go, I wonder what they're feeling. And the real powerful trick is to go, what's the need under the communication that the person is expressing to us? So sometimes somebody will say something, it'll be like, oh, well, what was that about? And there's kind of that propensity to react, to get defensive, but to realize where's that coming from? Like, go deeper. What's happening with that person that would make them say that? To try to anticipate what that need is and how that communication came about as a result of the need, and then speak to the need. I hope that that's not too esoteric.
No, don't be afraid to get too esoteric, because there's going to be different strategies for everybody. You were recently blessed with a lovely one, a lovely little baby. And so how are you navigating your self-care with looking after your baby, yourself, and your husband? Like, what do you guys do together to maybe strengthen your bond with your husband?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and the first thing is to know that we are really clear that this is a period of time that it is about giving to the baby. And so it's really understanding that. And luckily you get 9 months to figure that out, and have that time to prepare. But to really understand that there's a little child who needs us, and that's going to take up most of our time. And at the same time, if there are opportunities for us to connect or share a meal together while the baby's sleeping, or just send a little text or even share a photo together, if we're in different rooms or he had to go out and do something, to take that time to connect. So having that, again, a meal together, or just sharing about this new development in our life, because we're both integrating something very new, and having that discussion as well. Those are some of the main things.
I love it. When we do nice things for other people, how does it impact us emotionally, physiologically? Are we getting some type of endorphin or dopamine rush? Because we know this when we exercise, but what about when we're giving to other people in AKA acts of kindness?
So, I mean, nature is smart and wants us to get along and wants us to work together and build community. So my understanding is that when we participate in kindness towards other people, there's the oxytocin chemical, which is bonding, and there's serotonin, so kind of a steady well-being, and a dopamine hit. So we don't have to play video games and look at Instagram. We can do nice things for other people to get that dopamine hit. And so all of those, it's pretty powerful that there's this amazing chemical support when we are kind to other people.
That's great. There's actually a really great episode on Bulletproof Radio where I can't remember which episode it is, but it's actually talking about giving and doing acts of kindness for others. And I think it's lovely. So for example, you see someone in need on the street or someone's asking for help from you, and then you go and help them. And there's actually that physiological response. So just a reminder that if you see someone in need and they're asking you for help, just kind of check in. How can you maybe be of service to them?
That's great. Yes.
Should we ask ourselves how we can connect with others? We kind of, I don't know. I don't think that this is maybe something that's programmed in our culture right now here in North America. How can we be of service to others? So it's all about the self right now. So what are some tips that you could give us for actually just checking in and taking inventory with ourselves of how we can be of service to those around us, our neighbors, our communities, our loved ones, while maintaining that balance? Yeah, so just share some balance tips for how we can connect with others in meaningful ways.
Yeah, so one, again, just putting our awareness towards other people. I mean, if any of us have ever done a loving kindness meditation where we imagine all of the spheres of influence and how they expand. So just taking that time to think, okay, who's around me? Maybe how are they doing? Maybe I could send them a little text message, if you're not able to see them in person for whatever reason, and say, how are things going? Or acknowledging when you see someone that they're really doing something really cool. Sometimes when we're looking at Facebook or Instagram, there's a tendency to just scroll through and we forget to go, that's so cool what you're up to, or I really feel what you're going through. That's really tough. So taking that time just to notice and just to be aware of all of the different people and what they're up to. And sometimes just extending, please let me know if I can be a support in any way. I really want to. Or sharing, it can be just sharing something funny, like a meme or something like that, where you have a shared moment of connection. But we need that. We need that as humans. We need that connection. That's part of what helps us feel stable and steady. And if you look at the Okinawa diet, if you've ever heard of the Okinawa diet, that people live a long time in Okinawa. So yeah, they talk about nutrition and that's so important, and fresh air, but it's also the fact that they get together and hang out and talk. And that's also really important for longevity. So we really need those connections. And how do we do it? We just notice and we take action when we notice.
And And I have a sneaking suspicion that, a lot of people are actually feeling pretty isolated right now. And they would love it if people would maybe reach out to them. And I know for me, I do a lot of like give, give, give. And it's so great getting those, kind words from all of you tuning in through a direct message on my Instagram at Rachel Varga Official, here on Facebook, YouTube, sending an email, info@RachelVarga.ca. Because that's actually how I end up filling my cup, is actually giving back in this way. So there are maybe some people that are a little bit more like me, and that actually helps to fulfill them. But then there's sort of other types of people. So what are maybe the other types of personalities or types of individuals out there, and how can they maybe fill their cup through helping others and getting support from others as well?
So you're saying based on a person's unique temperament, like introverted or extroverted?
Actually, I did a little prep work before this, and I actually I pulled something, if you know what I mean.
All right.
Yes. And it was actually, what does it say here? It says divine talents.
Okay. Nice. Love that.
Yeah. So expand on that a little bit with like self-love and really directing our talents towards helping others.
I love that, because that's why we have talents. Like if someone is an amazing dancer, they're not meant to be doing that with the door closed, nobody's seeing, it's meant to be shared. And so part of discovering our gifts and our strengths is to realize that we are meant to share that with other people and connect, and that it is a gift to share. So I think that that's one thing that people don't realize, and I work with people sometimes that are struggling with self-esteem or whatnot. They don't realize what a gift it is when they share themselves with other people, when they take that time to connect, that it's a gift to themselves, but that other people appreciate that so much. So learning what our talents are and being the best of what we can do, so that we can be a part of that bigger picture of the community. It's like the quill and all of the threads that are connected and together. It's all important, and it all plays a vital part. We all play a vital part. I'm thinking about even people that maybe aren't wired to be as extroverted. They still oftentimes will have a lot of wisdom to share, when they do come out, or they're good at writing. So it's so important. And to your point about community, to know what your talent is, to develop it, believe in yourself enough so that you can share it with other people, so that we can all benefit.
This is a little bit off topic, but another thing that I pulled here was titled Dark Night of the Soul. And this has just been an insane year on many different levels. It's like, what's next? What's next in this year for the planet, for humanity? What are we going to have to adapt and evolve through? And I'm just curious, in your practice as a counselor, if you've really seen people go through almost like a pretty extraordinary unpacking of themselves and wanting to adapt and evolve, and then maybe the contrast of people just having a really tough time. And what are some tips and tricks that you can give sort of those types of people?
Well, I think, as you know, I'm a trauma counselor. And so in a sense, what you're talking about is how do we respond to traumatic stress or trauma, and as you know, there's that fight, flight, or freeze. And so I think that there's been a bit of feeling frozen for a bunch of people lately. It's like, what happened? We have to do all things differently and change our lives. And that's actually a place where I think we're oftentimes not as able to access our gifts when we're in that trauma response. So one thing is to just start to recognize, oh my gosh, I think I'm kind of like, it's almost like you hold your breath, and it's like your nervous system is holding its breath around all of this craziness.
And then you're in that sympathetic state, which is hugely taxing on your adrenals, releasing cortisol, basically leading you into that inflammatory cascade in the body.
Right. Absolutely. And so none of us probably are going to really be able to be our very best under that state. We can push it here and there and whatnot. So the first thing is to take a deep breath, to take that time to breathe, to get centered, and then connection is huge. if I think of there's so many ways to address trauma, but the overarching theme is basically to be able to share your story and connect with other people and to, in a safe realm. So I think it's kind of like debriefing, if people find themselves in that state, to connect, they certainly can connect with, someone in mental health, or, if they just need to connect with a friend or, someone that's a trusted person, to just say like, this has been hard. Like, gosh, there's been a lot present. And I don't know where to go or what to do or what the next step is. So just that act, though, of putting words to the story starts to get people less in that like limbic system kind of state. It starts to bring in the frontal lobes more. And then oftentimes people can strategize and be more strategic. And all of a sudden, we start to see little bits of light peek through the cloud. And it's like, oh, wait, you know what? I could try this. Or, you know what? I could do my business this way, and then we start to be able to become flexible and adapt more. So again, recognizing when you're a little off, first and foremost, and then taking that time to share, to connect. If there's a necessary, sometimes a little catharsis, like grieving, like what we thought we had or what has changed or what we wish were different. But once that has happened and you've given yourself some room for it to feel what you need to feel, then also it's important to be forward thinking. And what's really fun is then all the stuff that felt like a darkness, it becomes your fuel. It becomes your ammunition, and you can take that and use that as energy to push yourself forward to the next step in your life.
I love that. We just had a comment come through from Abby. Thank you so much for tuning in live here. And yes to connection. Actually, I was telling you, Leslie, right before this, we hopped on here for this recording. I was part of, it's a community that I've been a part of for nearly 8 years. And we have these monthly calls together. And these are people all over the planet that are, really trying to work together to help improve the lives of ourselves and others. So I've been able to get a lot of connection through that and through different online communities, other healthcare professionals that have a similar mission to myself. And it's been so nice getting to see some of my dear friends again. And I have to say this time's really highlighted those that are good for our self-care and that exchange of giving and receiving, that love and gratitude and support from one another. So that's kind of actually something I'd like to ask you about. Have you also noticed that in your practice, that some of your clients have really started to notice that some people are really good for them in their lives and some people aren't? How can we potentially navigate that with kindness and love for ourselves and the other individuals?
Yeah, so sometimes as there are changes in life, exactly, it becomes clearer that there are certain patterns that maybe worked in the past that no longer work. And I think the first thing is to just notice, to not just be on default mode and go, well, okay, we're keeping it this way because it's the way that's always been. or somebody talks to someone a certain way and it's hurtful and hey, they're just used to it. So, hey, it's part of it is to go, gosh, what am I really feeling? Checking in, listening to yourself first and foremost. And whether you're kind of getting that green light or orange light, it's like that old game of getting warmer, getting cooler. You kind of have an inner radar that knows when you're on a good track. And incidentally, a lot of times when people are in that service mode or sharing their gifts, they really get that green light. That it's a really, really good thing. But so first and foremost, just noticing how something feels, and sometimes it's not so much you have to like cut out everybody in your life. Sometimes it's just that there's an opportunity for a conversation. And if everyone is in a good space and healthy, that conversation can be so powerful. So it's just noticing when something is off, checking in about that, getting clear, and then seeing what the action step might be. And it's different for different people.
I just love hearing you speak. You have such a kind, soft voice. And I think this is really important for us to just start to pay attention to how we feel in different situations, different places, with different people, with different things. Start to really tune into yourself, and if people are going to be good for you, and also if you're going to be good for them as well. So what are some tips for maybe cultivating, really positive relationships, friendships with loved ones, community endeavors, and maybe also sort of trimming the fat, if you will, with relationships that might not be as supportive for you or as balanced as, they maybe should be?
As you were sharing, I was thinking of the Rumi quote that your task is not to seek for love, but to seek out the barriers that you've built against it. So part of it is learning where we're closed off, in our world. And, and what I do as a psychotherapist, it's addressing why are there these walls here, and so it's like learning to work through that and find a way to connect. And to your point, we want to connect with good people who are kind to us, who are like-minded, that are going to participate in that lovely balance of, giving and receiving. So it's so important, again, for us to just listen to ourselves, and whether we're getting warmer or getting cooler when we're talking with people, whether it feels aligned with our core sense of who we are and our values and what we want to bring into the world. So it's learning to know yourself first and foremost. And when we do that, I think then we're better able to connect with other people. The other piece is, like we talked about in the beginning, if there are areas that we want to energize, looking around and seeing how can we energize those areas. So if we have something on our hearts to be altruistic, not just be like, I wish, that'd be nice if I could, but to go, what is something tangible around me where I can help? And sometimes it's like somebody needs like canned goods, or who knows, or there are local opportunities just to step up, or again, provide that care. But to really think, if there's something on your heart that you want to give, how can you turn that into action?
I love that. I have another question for you. How can we lovingly give and receive feedback? So I'll just be totally honest with you. The reason why I'm doing this session, I feel like it's a lovely session with you, but we're doing this, podcast recording, is because I just had a great chat with my mom yesterday. I was like, hey, Mom, do you have any feedback for me for, the different interviews that I'm doing? And I have to be very careful who I interview, because I can't make, health claims and things like that, because this isn't medical advice. It's educational information. And some people that I've interviewed have kind of overstepped that. And it's my job to, make sure that this information is, number one, backed by research. That's really, really important. And then it's valuable and constructive. So yeah, my mom said to me, she's like, you talk a lot about self-care and self-love, and I just heard this sermon, and we kind of need to like shift away from that and really get back to the basics of how can we love our neighbor again. Mm-hmm. So I loved that feedback that she gave me. It was so loving. And it's, allowing me to hop on this interview with you and share this message, because mental health is definitely something that's super key right now. But also one of the reasons I'm passionate about sharing this particular message of giving and receiving in a balanced way is because this is what my most vibrant clients are doing. Mm-hmm. They are living their life's purpose. They're using their talents to help others, and it's kind of radiating outwards, and then it comes back to them. Mm-hmm. So that's that tie-in to radiance. It's not just about your skin. However, your skin is the largest organ of your body. So if you're like, oh, is this superficial that I want to take care of the health of my skin? Well, skin cancer is very real, especially for my skin type and yours. So we can get these precancerous skin lesions, atypical lesions, and full-on skin cancers that can actually, metastasize into other types of issues, right? Mm-hmm. So what are some tips for, giving and receiving loving feedback to those closest to us?
Mm-hmm. Well, feedback is so important, and so first of all, I'm just glad you're mentioning feedback, because it's part of how we kind of reality test that we know whether we're on a good track. So when we're receiving feedback, it's important to have a few trusted sources that we get feedback from. And so again, it's kind of like, know that there's that source of that person that consistently can give some good feedback. I think it's important to note that humans will oftentimes have a default that is very defensive, where we want to protect ourselves, and it hurts sometimes to have feedback, or we've had given someone shared feedback with us and they weren't that finessed at it, and so we've learned to close off. So unfortunately, what can happen is that we just close off and we just will instantly try to reject feedback. So it's important to know that we don't want to go into that default mode, but to take that deep breath, get into a parasympathetic state, recognize that there could be a propensity to get defensive. Notice where you're getting defensive in your body. Breathe, relax into it. Say, it's okay. I'm just going to hear this feedback right now. I don't have to respond to it right away. I can just hear it. And that it's like a basic attending skill of just reflecting back, but just letting the person know you've heard them. Like, okay, you're telling me this, even if it's the exact same thing that they just said to you. You'd be surprised how two people will go off into their own version of their own little universe, and they're not on the same page. So just letting the person know you've heard them. So again, checking in, body, relaxing the body, recognize there's a tendency to go into that default, and we want to switch that off and just be present. And, recognize that also you don't have to solve it right then and there. Sometimes it's enough to have heard the person and you've given them a gift by hearing feedback. So, just let's saying I'm hearing you. I really want to be able to give this a due diligence and the thought and care that deserves. So I will get back to you. So I think that's really important, is working on that lack of defensiveness, if at all possible. Like we talked about earlier, it's also about seeing the need in the other person and really going, okay, being empathetic. So rather than be defensive, go, what's happening with them? And looking at that loving part of them that is actually trying to give you the feedback.
I love it. I feel like I'm just getting a laser coaching session from you, Leslie. This is brilliant. We just had a live comment come through from Abby. Speaking authentically from your heart, always, not from your head. And I'm going to just add a little bit of clarity to this word authentically. I actually had the opportunity, JJ Virgin had me do a takeover on her podcast, Ask the Health Expert. JJ Virgin is an icon in the space of health and wellness. And when I interviewed her on my podcast, she's like, I can't stand it when people say, be authentic. And she's like, you should just always be yourself. And I'll put a little spin on this. You're going to be your most authentic version when you're your most truest, balanced, grounded, centered, and aligned version. And that comes from body, mind, spirit, energy practices and work. It's work. I did an hour and a half of spiritual, energetic body practices with, my community. So it's really important that we figure out what helps us become our most balanced versions of ourselves. So it's like that word authentic just started getting thrown around a couple of years ago. So I just like to put a spin on that. But I still continue to hear it a lot. And not speaking from your head, right? So I think that's really great. So Leslie, because you've been on the show a couple times and you've been tuning into the podcast for quite a while now, I think probably from the beginning of this year, what's some of your feedback for the information that's being shared here? What would you like to see more of? What would you like to see, shift a little bit? We're getting we're live here, guys. This is a live feedback. Practice what I preach, right?
Yeah. Well, I've just really, enjoyed your podcast and learned a lot. And so I love the content that you put out. And I guess just continue to do what you're doing like today is being adaptive and listening to the needs of the audience, which I'm sure will also change over time. But I love yeah. But I love the mind, body, and spirit, and so I think more of that. So that's my feedback.
I love it. That's wonderful. Leslie, do you have any closing words for this very real, raw, authentic, true conversation around the era of self-care and maybe getting back to the basics of looking after our temple, but also remembering to love our neighbors?
Well, I'd like to just again share that quote, because that quote's been around a long time and it's a really good one. And it's what immediately came to me when you mentioned this topic, which is that if I'm not for me, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, who am I? And if not now, when?
I love that. I'm going to print that out and, put that up in my space here and just sit with that today. And I encourage you guys all to as well. So Leslie, where can people find you?
So my website is Leslie Miranda, lmft.com. And I'm also on Instagram, leslie.e.s.miranda.
And how can people work with you? And what type of resources are you able to share with people at this time?
So my licensure is in California. So I'm licensed to provide psychotherapy in California. And at the same time, I do also talk and give motivational talks on wellness and just how people can live their best life. So I'm happy to connect with people on any of those points, or, direct them to some resources if they're interested in some of the modalities I offer, like EMDR or brain spotting. They can certainly touch base with me, or if they just want to say hi and share some positivity, I'd love to connect with people on that level too.
Yeah, the community and, the men and women that I've connected with since starting this journey on the podcast here over the last couple of years now has been really lovely. And I'm just so grateful for everyone that's taking this journey with us and being receptive to the message that you're sharing here, Leslie. It's really lovely. So I commend you for the work that you're doing, and congratulations on your family and remaining a positive, beautiful, radiant light in the world. That's your work. So thanks for being here today.
Thank you. And thank you so much for what you're doing. And you do really add so much value. And I appreciate your podcasts and all of the work and effort you put into just sharing all of this amazing information. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. It actually fills me up too. So it's actually a great exchange for me, because I get to have awesome conversations with, forward thinking, health individuals like yourself, and then just kind of get to share that with whoever wants to receive it. So thank you everyone for joining us today in this episode here on the Rachel Varga podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, the podcast, leave a review. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you'd like to hear more about and what you enjoyed hearing, so that I can kind of continue to give more of that to you. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day, and don't forget to, just be aware of that self-care and make sure that you're balancing it with how you're sharing love and exchanging energy with people, places, and things around you. Bye, everyone, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.